Let's get to some of the important ideas within Islam itself. So I think that you'd agree that sort of Quranic verses such as the Surah An-Nisa 434, which seems to condone a husband perpetrating domestic violence against his wife as a means of disciplining her, seems to say that men are superior to women. It seems to say that quite explicitly, that would be the heart of the cultural problem. Those types of surahs within the text, within the Quran or the Hadith.
Yes. So what I have said in the past, and I still stand by it, is those texts are in the Quran. And yes, there are people who are fanatical and puritanical enough who want to use these Quranic texts as the way we use the GPS. Well, if the book says, hit your wife, if she disobeys you, then I do it because the book says that. And so you get into this circular reasoning. Again, with things like this, I just believe in accepting, looking at reality as it is. There are men, imams, shouting this from the pulpit. They are preaching it to young men. And so a lot of these young people feel morally justified by reading that verse when they engage in domestic violence. And then some other guy comes along and says, well, it's not really meant that way. It's meant some other way. Well, if God is absolutely so clever and so omniscient, why couldn't he just, make it very clear? And it is,
a little bit clear.
To me, it's perfectly clear. But then what that does, what that whole exercise does, is it takes you away from discussing the problem and holding people, the perpetrators of the domestic violence, responsible. And instead, we're having a discussion on theology. And again, it's just not fruitful. It's not productive.
Well, in terms of, I know you called for a reformation, and I thought, so I spoke about this with an Islamic scholar once about this particular verse as being, I would say, problematic, obviously. And his interpretation was, in terms of from the Arabic, that it's not a verse about domestic violence. It's a verse about divorce, that it means strike out. And then he was talking about the Hadith, how Muhammad in the Hadith explicitly states that domestic violence is not to be perpetrated. And I wondered whether, because I thought about you talking about when you heard Osama bin Laden and you thought that what he offered was a very plausible version of Islam. I thought people doing that, those scholars, is that, I think you disagree with this, but is that part of the solution, to offer a plausible reinterpretation of those texts that are non-violent?
Well, I actually don't disagree with it. And the main point I make in my book, Heretic, is that it is for the people who are saying Islam can be reformed, it should be reformed. I just make the case for a reformation, for a change, for a modification. And I talk about these three groups of Muslims: the Mecca Muslims, the Medina Muslims, and the reformers or the modifiers. Now, the Medina Muslims are very clear in their fanaticism. They're saying, no, we want to live by the laws of the Quran and the Hadith, and we want to follow Muhammad's example, and no change is required. The people who are seeking change are bad. And then you have a very large, silent majority that I describe as the Mecca Muslims, who would rather just simply not be confronted with all sorts of dissonance with regard to how they lead their lives, which is generally peaceful, and what's written in the Quran. And so they can't handle that kind of dissonance, so they ignore it altogether and just say, no, the Quran is a good book, it's a peaceful book, let's change the subject. And then you have the modifiers who try and struggle, as you describe in this, as you just described, with verses like this, when I say, well, it says beat, but actually it means something else. And so it's with that group that I say, look, here are these 5 key points. If you're serious about change, here are these 5 points, they're big and problematic, and it would be nice to have some kind of consensus and maybe some kind of movement that gets behind these 5 things and changes them. And then after that, we can speak about an Islam that is changed and reformed and liberal and, all the other labels that we've been using lately.